What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Golf Bag Podcast. My name is Drew, also known as Redkacheek, and we will be previewing the 3M Open during this show. It is Sunday afternoon, so I figured I could get this out early now that the tournament ended for the British Open or the Open Championship. Scotty won. We can pull it up and take a look. Uneventful Sunday, to be completely honest. It was interesting to see so many Americans at the top. Obviously, got her up after last week. Wyndham Clark after a bad start. Same with Bryson, and just played lights out the next 3 days. So not. Thursday and Friday weather was pretty good for the British Open, and then after that, it turned into TPC Royal Portrush. So, congrats to Scotty, but I don't have too many thoughts really for the Open Championship. It was pretty good. Thursday was leading the Millie, and we know that doesn't always pan out. Usually doesn't. There's a lot of good lineups that shake out over the course of the week. I think that lineup that was winning ended up finishing like 600th. So still not bad in a 120,000 person tournament, but it was fun for a quick minute. But we only have 5 events left for the 2025 season, 3M Open, and then on to the FedEx Cup playoffs and then the Tour Championship. So the season is winding down. I know football is right around the corner. So did want to say thank you to everybody that's tuned in this season. Obviously, we'll be doing content for the rest of the fall swing. It's amazing how fast this season has gone by, starting in January. And then once April rolls around with Augusta, you got the Masters, PGA Championship, US Open, and then the British Open, and then the season's pretty much done. So pretty crazy how fast this year has gone. I don't know if that's just with age or what. It just feels like years tend to go by faster nowadays. But we'll use this show to preview the 3M Open. But I did want to say thank you to everybody that has tuned in over the season and has subscribed to be a Fantasy Golf Bag member. Absolutely appreciate it and appreciate the support. Like I said, we'll be continuing through the fall swing. We have everything up now for live as well. So if that's your cup of tea or you want to add some extra exposure to other golf contests, that is now available, as well as like we added a bunch of cool stuff to the player profiles page to see, draws and fades and some of their driver stats, which is pretty cool. So we will continue plugging along for the rest of the season, but did want to point that out. We only have 5 events left, but hopefully you guys stick around. And I would, obviously biased here, but would recommend you hanging on through the fall swing and participate in some golf contests. They are pretty fun. And I know everybody focuses on football, which is fair, but would encourage you to kind of stick around and play some PGA DFS and some live DFS for the rest of the season. Let's go ahead and jump into the 3M Open. I will use this. I haven't had a ton of feedback necessarily for this show in particular. I know, I use this as like a preview / research show, not so much a plays show. I think in our old days for doing the podcast, to be completely fair, doing the preview on Monday and then doing plays is not half-assed, but certainly you don't have a ton of time, especially salaries come out on, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday for the week. There's not a ton of time to look at the golf course and then really dig into. You can look at the top of the board. It's pretty easy, but like the real decision making is kind of middle of the board and the value plays. Those are the ones that really create leverage, or at least you're making decisions on in your player pool that can make a big difference in your expected value for the week. So again, this show is strictly kind of researching the golf course and talking through some of the tools we have at Fantasy Golf Bag and giving you my insight into how I would approach the week. Obviously, looking at stuff that we have like the time machine is very unbiased. You can look at that and it's very clear to see, some events, the lead-in stats are not as predictive as others. Obviously, the majors and some of the tougher events, ball striking and all the really good stats that everybody likes to look at are very, very predictive in terms of success. And then there's some weeks like this one we're about to look at where guys come in with atrocious form and do pretty well, if not win. So just wanted to throw that out there. If you want to see more plays, obviously I do stuff for Fantasy Golf Bag members on Tuesday and Wednesday. But yeah, this is just generally speaking. The goal is to do like a research show, looking at the golf course, using some of our tools. So we'll go ahead and hop into the Course Preview Pro. And then like throughout the season, even though we have 5 events left and through the fall, we'll be adding even more stuff to this. So like, I know we've highlighted the time machine tool the last couple of weeks, which I think is very, very important to understand what players' form looks like in prior years and how that led into their results for that event. And we're going to add some stuff like correlation to make your research a little bit easier so that you don't have to go digging around like we did last week. We just kind of searched around for different stat combinations to see which ones did the best. And there was definitely a mixed bag with guys coming in with good form to Royal Portrush in 2019. Some played okay and some missed the cut or played bad. So the goal is to simplify this and obviously make your research even easier. Very valuable, but easier, if that makes sense. So with that being said, we can turn the corner on the Open Championship. We can crack a beer. And then we can dive into TPC Twin Cities. All righty. So last 5 winners: Jonathan Vegas, Lee Hodges, Tony Finau, Cameron Champ, Michael Thompson. Winning scores average around 18 under par. You can see there at the top, Jonathan Vegas won last year at 17 under, Lee Hodges at 24 under in 2023. It is a par 71. So, 17 under par, 15 under par for Cameron Champ. Not crazy low scoring. It's, it's definitely scoreable. The average return to par per round, so this is scoring average per player for the field, is about 0.8 strokes under par. So definitely an easy golf course, but not like crazy birdie fest material. It is on the longer side, 7,400 yards, bent grass greens, running about 12.5 on the stemp. Average par 3, 202 yards on the longer side. Average par 4, 439, and average par 5, 594. You can see the makeup of the hole by holes here. Generally speaking, not a lot of difficult holes. Hole 9 plays 0.3 shots over par. That's easily the most difficult hole on this golf course. Everything else plays, there's a few holes playing over par, but for the most part, everything plays about even par, slightly under par, or a tenth of a shot or more under par. Obviously, the par 5s play closer to half a shot under par. But overall, the golf course is not difficult in terms of scoring. But like I said, we'll talk about the actual the makeup of the golf course here in just a second. But that gives you a good indication of kind of what to expect this week. Like I said, average winning score 18 under par, average cut line 2.5 under par. Driving distance, driving accuracy, missed fairway penalty. Those are the big ones that we look at. And distance penalty. We didn't have that last week for Royal Portrush. The next time, I don't know when they're going back to Royal Portrush, but we'll have the distance penalty up for that event. Probably not that high based on what I was looking at least visually. But driving distance, 298.8. Again, you can highlight over some of these key stats and kind of see the trend in driving distance. So driving distance, definitely linear from those in the top 25, top 10 and winner. Distance definitely played a part in those doing or having success in the event. Driving accuracy, about the same. So 62.3% driving accuracy. It's a little bit higher than the tour average. Not crazy though. You can see the winner hit more fairways, quite a bit more fairways than the rest of the field, but you can actually see a dip in the top 25 to top 10, which is interesting. So like driving accuracy, not crazy. And why would that be? Missed fairway penalty is only 0.37. It's only 0.01 over the tour average. So the rough isn't crazy. I know we have it listed at 4 inches. The driving accuracy is not crazy low. Missed fairway penalty is not, crazy high. So don't see a big difference there. Ironically, looking at the driving distance numbers, and it's probably, I'm talking out loud a little bit, but the driving distance, linear progression from top 25, top 10 and winner. When we look at the distance penalty, there actually is less of a distance penalty at this golf course than the average PGA Tour course. So that's likely coming from the par 5s where guys can hit driver. You think about Cameron Champ being a winner, Tony Finau being a winner, Jonathan Vegas being a winner, definitely the longer hitters. So it could skew that a little bit and not too indicative of every single hole, obviously, which it isn't, which we'll look at the driving buckets here in just a second. Going down into the green regulation stuff and missed fairway or missed green regulation penalty. 69.5% green regulation rate, so it's above average. Makes sense for an easy golf course or an easier scoring golf course. Nothing crazy there. Missed green regulation penalty is up, so missing the greens here is definitely a problem. Do not miss greens in regulation. That goes to the scoring aspect as well, because typically when you miss, I mean, you can see it right there. When you miss a green, you're costing yourselves about 3/4 of a shot to the field. So obviously, if the average field scoring average for a round is almost a shot under par, you don't want to be missing too many greens, giving up 0.75 shots or 0.78 shots. Green regulation from the fairway, 78%, and green regulation from the rough is up 10% over the tour average at 53%. So it's very easy to hit greens in regulation from the rough. That's not the big problem. Obviously, some water is in play. The big misses are typically the bigger issue here. But just driving as an overall stat, nothing crazy. I wouldn't say driving is a big difference maker. Obviously, some of the winners have been on the longer side, but we'll look at the driving buckets here in just a second. The radar chart is interesting. I'll take out the winner as usual. So this is the top. This is the made cut, is the middle ring, the top 25, and then the top 10. You can see around the green is non-existent. I already talked about, generally speaking, the easier golf courses, guys shouldn't be missing fairway or shouldn't be missing greens. You're going to struggle quite a bit to keep up with birdies, obviously. Approach is a big factor. Off the tee is a little bit negated. And then putting isn't as big as a factor as I thought it would be. It honestly comes down to a little bit of off the tee. You can see a jump from those who made the cut to the top 10 and or top 25 and top 10. There's a little bit of a jump in the approach. And then putting is pretty close. We'll say it's about 2.8 shots gained for the top 25 players, and for the top 10, gain about 3.8. So about a 1-stroke difference. Not crazy different. Generally speaking, if you're finishing the top 10, that's about in line with a typical tour event. But not much to gain off, from a strokes gain perspective. When you look through this, gaining a little bit off the tee, then the field, gaining a little bit more on approach. That's really the two recipes for success. And then obviously putting, you just got to make some putts to keep up with a low scoring event like this. All right, driving distance distribution and approach distance distribution. Most drives are 290 to 310. So I think that does go in line with the driving distance number for like the top 10 and the winners. But you can see 270 to 290, we still have 3 tee shots. So there's not much to be gained, generally speaking, when the driving distance is in that bucket. That's usually a less than driver hole. The guys are hitting it to the same spot. You can't gain much. 250 to 270 is in the same boat. There's 2 of those. So honestly, there's 5 tee shots where I would say drivers out of play, which brings the off the tee number down. If Kevin Kisner's playing, he's got 250 to 270. He's playing whatever hole that is. You can see it here. Hole 10 and hole 14. He's going to hit it to the same exact spot that Jonathan Vegas does. So the distance is not going to be an advantage. The other holes in this 290 to 310 is probably where you can gain some stuff. It's the par 5s and a handful of the par 4s. But generally speaking, like if I'm going to build this out, which I definitely would in the player IQ, using the driving IQ and the approach IQ, which you guys all know about, obviously a big chunk is going to be 290 to 310, a little bit to 270, 290, and a very little bit to 250 to 270. I would still weight it. It's not 1 tee shot, it's 2 out of 14. I would still include that in my driving IQ model. But if you want to just focus on 290 to 310, that is totally fair and would not argue against you in that regard, because that's going to be the majority of the tee shots that make a difference. So that totally makes sense. Approach distance distribution, basically in line with the PGA Tour average. 175 to 200 is a little bit above. 200 plus is down. So honestly, not a lot of long approach shots here. even considering the distance of the golf course being at 7,400 yards and a par 70. You got a lot of wedges, 50 to 125. Got a lot of wedges, 125 to 150. Technically speaking, that's still wedges. 150 to 175. Honestly, some of those could be wedges. We'll call it mid irons for sake of argument. So a lot of wedges and a lot of mid irons. Just a very few amount of long irons. These guys are so long, anyways. 200 plus is 5 iron, 6 iron for the most part. It's not crazy long. So this would be a pretty broad bucket in the approach IQ to look at each one of those. And I think that's the biggest advantage with the IQ stats. When we go to dig into approach numbers, which we know are important, we just looked at it. And then when we look at the lead-in stats, obviously, I think approach is going to be fairly indicative of success here. You would want to weight out each of those buckets differently because of the courses that they played leading in. Maybe they had many more 175 to 200 and 200 to 225. We're not getting as many of those wedge shots in. So we definitely don't want to use their, aggregate strokes gained approach number. I want to weight it based on the approaches they're going to have this week. All right, let's take a look at the past winners and lead-in stats. Like I said, Jonathan Vegas, Lee Hodges, Tony Finau, the last 3 winners, their profiles look pretty good. If you look at tee to green, off the tee approach, gaining in all those categories. What gets a little bit weird is looking at Cameron Champ and looking at Matthew Wolff back in 2019. They came in with pretty bad form. Michael Thompson, similar. He was gaining the most putting and then the second most in approach, which kind of makes sense. But like Cameron Champ won this event with very poor form. He was just gaining strokes off the tee. Matthew Wolff, who's a good driver of the golf ball, but he was losing strokes off the tee when he led into this event in 2019. I think this was right after he turned pro out of Oklahoma State. So he only had 5 rounds. So that could be skewed a little bit. I should say it's likely skewed. How much is to be determined, but losing a little bit off the tee, gaining strokes around the green, like there's nothing there to really show he was a great play leading into that event. He was priced at 7,300. So obviously Vegas didn't like him either. We don't have Vegas odds for 2019's event. The average odds for the winner are 80 to 1. So definitely look for some longer shots or, mid numbers for guys that can win here, not just the stronger favorites. And that goes in line with Birdie Fest, right? Like there's a little bit more volatility unless your name is Scotty Scheffler. The Birdie Fest tend to be more wide open. They're easier. There's less demand on the ball striking numbers themselves. And then the putting makes up a big chunk of, the overall strokes gained total number that leads to the win. So we'll look at the time machine here in a second, but did want to point that out. The last couple winners, definitely more in line with a good profile for the golf course. And then there are a few outliers. Cameron Champ, probably the main one. Matthew Wolff, you can kind of throw out a little bit based on the limited sample. And Michael Thompson's just kind of all over the place. Michael Thompson's probably the wildest winner here over the last couple of years. But overall, pretty good. Like we just focused on those 3. Off the tee was a big chunk. I like that. Approach, obviously, very important. I like that. And then you can look at green regulation, green across the board, bogey or worse, also green across the board. So those guys were coming in with pretty good form, hitting a lot of greens, not making a lot of bogeys. Pretty good recipe for success anywhere. And they just happened to play well that week. You can actually see, for Jonathan Vegas and the guys that did well, who gained the most strokes putting. You can see Grieserman was number 1. He finished 2nd. KH Lee was number 3. He finished T9. Excuse me. Then we got T12, T12, T19, T19. So like the putting was a big part of this, but a lot of guys made a lot of putts. We're talking about a few strokes difference. Like I said, off the tee, not a huge difference maker. Taylor Pendrith, Sahith Theegala led the field in off the tee, finished 5th and 6th. That's pretty good. But you also have guys like Adam Schenk, T59, Doug Gim, T24, Carson Young, 71st. So a mixed bag there. Carson Young and Adam Schenk, probably the biggest difference is really the approach play and then around the green and putting for Carson Young. So it's a full bag. Like you gotta do a lot well this week. What were they doing leading into it is a different topic, and we will dive into it next. Let's just quickly look at guys with the best form. We don't have DK salary up yet, obviously, being this is Sunday afternoon. So we'll look at the guys with the most top 10 finishes. Probably not a ton of them. Tony Finau has 3. Emiliano Grillo has 3. Jonathan Vegas has 2. Hadwin has 2. And Keith Mitchell has 2. Anybody with good top 5s? Let's see. Yeah, we got 4 guys with 2 top 5s. Vegas, Finau, Grillo, Mitchell. That's really it. And honestly, 2 out of 5 years, and they didn't even play all 5 years. So not a ton off of the course history. We can look at guys who have missed the cut the most. I'd be curious to see that. If I had salaries up, that would be even more helpful, which it's not there. So I'll probably just skip over this part. But you can also sort by missed cuts and see the guys that have missed the most cuts at this event. That's probably a good indication of the bad course fit or course history that you don't want to play. Malnati is just all over the place, which we know about. And then those with no missed cuts, most of the same thing. Garnett, Finau, Aaron Badley, interestingly enough, Patrick Rogers, McNeely. So enough guys have actually played here a good handful of times. You can also, I'll just hop to this really quick. We don't talk about this too much. I don't have the Open Championship listed here yet, but you can actually go to our player form matrix. It's under the free tool. So this is actually one of our free tools, which I don't talk about much at all, but we have, a custom stat model that's free, odds to price values, and player rolling stats, as well as this player form matrix. It's under recent form and course history. If you sort by course strokes gained, this is by round. And obviously, if some guys have only played one event, it's going to be skewed if they had a good finish. But you can easily sort by course history, strokes gained on that course. Max Grieserman, Danny Willett, Kurt Kitayama, Patrick Fishburne, Johnson Vegas, Tony Finau, Alex Noren, Sung J M. So that's an easy way for you to kind of, make a number out of the course history and not just look at their finishes. Probably should add that to the course preview pro, to be honest. But I think that's it for the overall golf course. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's a birdie fest. It's not tricked up. There's not much really unique about the 3M or TPC Twin Cities. Just kind of glancing through some of these things. Yeah, proximity is down across the board. It's just much easier to hit good approach shots when you have wedges in. Part of it, right? All right, let's look at the time machine. Let's do the easy one first, which is under Pro Tools. All right, so this is 2024. You can go back to any of the years, look at the top 10, top 25, etc. We'll do the top 25. I'm going to quickly go down here. You can see right off the bat, like none of the averages are highlighted green. So there's no real single number that stands out. I will sort quickly by off the tee. And this is going to be perfect when we add in the correlations because this will make this so much easier. You can still dig into each event and like the stats leading in, but it'll also summarize it more efficiently to see like, okay, well, off the tee was like 0.6% or 0.6 correlation to the actual finish position. We want to look for pretty high numbers. So off the tee, let's see, pretty good for the most part. Approach, not as much, funny enough. Off the tee seems to be the biggest one right now. Around the green, all over the place, makes sense. Putting, a little bit better, but not crazy. We'll take a quick look at the rest. Like green regulation is usually a pretty stable stat just because there's so many approach shots. You talk about 18 approach shots basically every round. You can see that's pretty close. You got a Patrick Fishburne, Johnson Vegas, a mixed bag in there. Let's look at 23 off the tee. Pretty mediocre, I would say. Approach, same thing. Not crazy. Bogey or worse, we talked about that in the preview. Let's look at that really quick. Yeah, not too strong either. So let's go ahead and dive into the Stat Model Pro, and we'll go back to the time machine. And let's just see if we can quickly build a model and see who pops in one of those years. Let's just use 24. Let's go back to the 3M Open. All right, let's do my model first. I always like to look at the IQ stat. It's a pretty good one to catch the winner. You're likely going to find some outliers. You'll see quite a few miscuts in this mix as well. But Jonathan Vegas was 4th in our IQ stat leading into the 2024 3M Open. He finished 1st, obviously. Patrick Fishburne was 3rd. He finished 6th. And Tony Finau was 2nd and finished 12th. IQ stat's always a pretty good starting point. Let's go ahead and just do some quick weighted rankings and just see what this looks like. Yeah, not terrible. Honestly, probably a little bit better than even the Royal Port Rush stuff we looked at. And again, this is just 24. We can go back to 23 or any of the years and take a peek at what we're doing. Off the tee, there's a few guys kind of lower down the board that did okay. Finau was actually losing, or is he just gaining 0.02 strokes off the tee? Not very high. Same with Spectrum, not crazy. See if anything stands out. Bogey or worse? Probably bogey or worse. We talked about that in the overall course lead-in stuff for the winner. But if you look through here, you can easily see, like if I model this out, all these stats in this is Redkacheek's model. So this is just my default stuff. You can see like the guys that were outliers in terms of finish were the worst in bogey or worse. So like Keith Mitchell, T46 was 71st. Carson Young, 71st, was 60th. Luke Clanton actually missed the cut. He was 39th. Tom Hoagie was 92nd, missed the cut. But all of them graded out well in all the other categories. So let's actually bump up bogey or worse to like 20%. Let's normalize that. Let's see if that brings it down a little bit. Not enough. Let's see if we can. We probably need to not double count off the tee. So we'll take out Spectrum for today, since strokes gained is what's used on the course preview pro. Got IQ stat pretty high. We like that. Green regulation probably should be pretty high. I like that. Proximity. There's some really good correlation with proximity, but there's also some negative in terms of like Keith Mitchell was pretty good and did terrible. Carson Young was number 1 in proximity, finished 71st. So let's actually zero out proximity. I'm not too much of a fan of that right now. And then bogey or birdie or better. There's some good and some bad, to be completely honest. So let's actually zero that out and just use bogey or worse. So let's bump up bogey or worse to 25%. Off the tee, 15%. Approach, we'll keep that around 10%. IQ stat, I do love it. So let's bump that up to 20%. I'm just getting close to 100, and then we'll normalize it. Tee to green, what does tee to green look like? Yeah, not crazy great, just because it includes so many different things. So let's take out tee to green. Let's give a little more bump to off the tee. And let's normalize that. That's pretty close. All right. So we get Vegas up to 2nd. He finished 1st. Luke Clanton is number 1 now, and he missed the cut. So unfortunately, we would have struck out on Luke Clanton. The rest of these guys look pretty good. Definitely some missed cuts in here. If I go down to the bottom, or I guess I can just sort by finish position. Like approach had the least. You can kind of see that here visually, right? The approach lead-in form for these guys that did really well was almost non-existent. There's some guys that had some pretty good finishes with some bad approach play. Off the tee has been the most consistent. Green regulation was kind of all over the place. Yeah, so let's do this. Let's take out approach. Let's bump back in birdie or better. And let's bump back in proximity 5%. See what this looks like. Well, Vegas moves to number 1, so we're moving in the right direction for part of this. We still get a bunch of guys kind of all over the place. So let's just copy this model. Let's exit this. Let's go back into 2023. I'm just curious how much of this carries over. Like I said, the correlations would help out quite a bit for your sake and mine. All right, so everything copies over. Just like if we found a really good model that we like from prior years, we can just snap back to the current week and everything copies forward. So we can just kind of use it as is. This is what it would have looked like in 2023. A bunch of guys. T64 Aberg was number 1. I'm sure he was probably really popular. We can go look actually. What was Aberg at the 2023 3M Open? 21% ownership. So yeah, definitely a popular play that week. Lucas Glover, Ryan Palmer, Sepp Straka missed the cut. A lot of good stuff. Let's see if we can change the sample size. Again, hopefully you guys enjoy this a little bit. It's a fun exercise to kind of look back at prior years, because this is exactly what you were doing this time within a day or two 2 years ago, and you're probably going through the same decisions, and this is what it would have looked like. So all right, let's see a little bit further back. Let's do the last. We'll do 2 big snapshots. So let's do the last 12 months. We'll do last 50 rounds. See what that looks like. Not crazy. Good or bad. Definitely some weird numbers with like the approach play. Guys played really well with bad approach numbers coming in. Birdie or better. Bogey or worse seems to be like the biggest standout, which is interesting. Definitely some misses, like Bezadenhout, proximity and bogey or worse, missed the cut, but his off the tee was bad. So like that kind of makes sense. Let's just simplify this. Let's clear this out. Let's just do bogey or worse, 33%, off the tee, 33%, and IQ stat. Is it IQ stat we wanted to do? Yeah, do 33% IQ stat. See what this looks like. Pretty good. And much better. Simplifying this goes a long way. Now, we are pretty far sample size back, last 50 rounds in the last 12 months, but that moves a lot of the miscuts down, just simplifying, what we're looking at. Sometimes people can get into the weeds, which is fun and can be bad, where you're splitting up 5% or 10%, 20 different ways. It gets too thin. And I think a lot of times you're better off just trying to figure out, even like bogey or worse. Go back to that. Like generally speaking, even like bogey or worse is pretty close. Like there's a lot of guys in the top 30, a couple in the top 10. Not awful. It's when you start to spread it out and get too broad of a group, especially on a low scoring event like this. It's really just 2 stats, bogey or worse and off the tee. I'm going to take out IQ stat actually. Pretty good. Let's do one more snapback. Let's see like the last 12 events. However many rounds we can get in there. Not bad. see if we can do one more thing. Yep, I know what to do. Bear with me. We're going to tinker with this thing till we get one really good. Brent Grant kind of throws things out. 14 rounds in those events. Go back one more. I think it's pretty standard. Off the tee. Try one more thing, and then we're going to hop to one more year, and then we're going to look at the current year and see what pops out. Let's see what this looks like really quick. Yeah, I don't like it. Let's just stick to off the tee. Bogey or worse, as silly as that sounds. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the closest thing we can get. Let's do one more year. Let's do 2022, and then let's look at the current year and take a look at that. Very interesting. Yeah, this looks pretty good. 2023 was kind of a weird year. So like if we do a super simple build, see if IQ stat looks any better here. It does look better. So I probably would want to add in the IQ stat. And the correlations would be over all those years that they played it, not just one single year. So it'd be even more helpful to kind of look at that. But this is 2022, and we got, number 1, number 3, number 6, and number 8 in the model finished first, second, and 16th. So a much better collection there. I'm going to see if the time frame changes anything much. Not too bad. One more look. Yeah, last 12 events is kind of the sweet spot, which is what we typically default to anyways. So let's hop to the current year and take a look at what a super simple weighted model of off the tee and bogey or worse, as silly as that sounds, what does that lead to? Cameron Champ, number 1. Chris Goddard, number 2. Makes sense. The guy is playing very good. Would not be too surprised if he won. But like we saw, I mean, this golf course can be volatile in that aspect of guys coming in with good form and missing the cut. Some guys coming in with good form end up winning or just, finishing the top 5. But Cameron Champ, Chris Goddard, Michael Thorbjornsen, Matty Schmid, Rico Hoey, Adam Scott, Thomas Rosenmuller, Jake Knapp, Kevin Yu. Those are your top 10. And honestly seems like a really good list. A really good list. How could any of those guys miss the cut? It's a good question to ask on a Wednesday night as you're building with those 10 guys. Yeah, that's what I would like to look at. See if there's anything else we could tinker with. Not really. Like we can look through like course pars and filter on par 71 or course yardages on longer golf courses. I don't really care about that too much. Rather just give me more data and take a look through it. But I think that'll do it, guys. That is basically where we stand. We just kind of simplified this all the way. But we can go back to 2024 really quick. Just one more look back since we kind of tinkered with this and then left. We don't want the Olympic golf competition. I want the 3M Open. See what that would have looked like. Yeah, still really good. This is, man, I know people love to tinker, and it's fun, and that's why this is built for people to do that stuff. But like, it's bogey or worse, pretty high correlation. A lot of stuff goes hand in hand with that. Decent drives, decent approach shots goes in with bogey or worse. Around the green doesn't matter. Bogey or worse obviously includes guys scrambling a little bit, but when we include off the tee as like a big factor, which we did, in 2024, we would have had the winner, which is Vegas, Patrick Fishburne, T6. When we look back at the 2022, we would have had 4 guys inside the top 5. Pretty good. And then while I got you, for those 3 people still listening, let's go to 2021. Fun stuff. Like, what would I have done? Like, there you go. That's the week I want to have this week. So 2021 3M Open, this exact same model, 50% bogey or worse, 50% off the tee. How simple. It is number 1, Mito Pereira, finished T6. Number 2, Vegas, finished second. Number 3, Bubba Watson, finished T51. Number 4, Cameron Champ, won it. And number 5, Keith Mitchell, finished 5th. So in our top 5, we had 4 top 6s. Pretty good. All right. So that's what we'll do. Like I said, you can go into the player IQ, which is also equally fun to tinker around with. This is a better course fit or course profiling tool. Whenever that data loads for all the data that's in there, but the driving IQ and approach IQ, we can dig into, those who are gaining the most strokes in those specific types of holes. But yeah, the Stat Model Pro Time Machine, going to add in some correlation stuff to make it a little bit easier, but tinker with it. Let me know what your thoughts are with off the tee, bogey or worse. How simple can it be? But again, half the battle with PGA DFS is like avoiding landmines. And like, I want to be balanced and like, okay, I want to have something good that helps me find guys that finish well. But also, if there's a bunch of missed cuts in there, let's just say that the top 10 guys, 5 missed the cut and 5 finished in the top 20. How good is that? Arguably, it could be good. It could be good. If you had a MME pool of 40 guys, you're going to have some missed cuts. That's part of it. If you had the top, 10 in the top 20 out of that pool, you probably had a pretty good week. When I can kind of do a little bit better and get those guys into more in the top 10, that's even better. So it does look like it's been a little bit back and forth over the last couple of years, but in those, 3 of the last 5 that we looked at, just simply running bogey or worse, 50% off the tee, 50% in the last 12 events, last 50 rounds. Most of them had like 24 to 30 rounds. That was the best combination. So that is it, guys. Like I said, we have some new tools dropping this week in the player profiles and the course preview pro, looking back at like prior events, etc. The betting tools, you can go into the matchups tool. I probably need to do a new video on that for people to run their parlays, but a pretty fun way to generate a bunch of parlays and see which ones have the best win equity and EV, which is shown right here, which is pretty fun to do. So a very easy way for you to go generate a bunch of head-to-heads or 3-ball matchups, make a bunch of parlays, and then take a look at which ones had the most win equity and EV equity. All right, guys. Fun week ahead. Like I said, 5 weeks left until the Tour Championship, or 5 events left until the Tour Championship. So appreciate everybody tuning in. As always, my DMs are open. Discord is open. You can always reach out to me. We have the wish list channel in the Discord. So I know guys pop their ideas in there. And I think I'm batting, 900 on getting everything added in that people ask for. So be sure to check that out. You can join us at fantasygolfbag.com. Until then, guys, stay safe. Have a great rest of your weekend and a great week. 3M Open, FGWC Championship. Good luck to you guys as well. See ya.